Fantasy football draft season continues to move along. We're now into the second week of the preseason. I want to talk about 4 wide receivers who initially didn't really find myself in on this season, but some guys who have grown on me as we get deeper into draft season. All right, let's start out in Denver with Courtland Sutton. Now, if you had asked me a couple of months ago, I would have said, yeah, Courtland Sutton, he's not flashy. He's not exciting. I don't know about the direction of that offense. But ultimately, this is a guy who finished as the wide receiver 15 last season. And that came after a slow start. Really, he took off in the middle of the year. It coincided with Bo Nix really turning a corner as a quarterback. From week 8 on, when I looked at the numbers, Courtland Sutton was wide receiver 7 in PPR. He had more fantasy points than Lad McConkey, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors. The list goes on. Now, can we expect him to sustain that kind of pace all season, 18 fantasy points per game? Realistically, probably not. But you look at the ADP right now, he's going as the wide receiver 21 at the NFFC. You can get him in the 5th round, sometimes even later in your home leagues. I expect Bo Nix to take a major step forward this season. Sean Payton, the way he's talked about him all offseason, he seems to be in love with his quarterback and seems to think that he could be a top 7 or 8 guy in the NFL. We do need to keep in mind the Broncos did bring in some target competition in the form of Evan Ingram. I think he's going to be a key piece in that offense. So we need to be realistic about the ceiling for Courtland Sutton, but the rest of that receiver core in Denver still very much unsettled. I mean, the next Broncos wide receiver doesn't come off the board until well after pick 125 in Marvin Mims. So coming into draft season, I wasn't fired up about Courtland Sutton, but been finding myself taking him more and more often lately. Another wide receiver who fits this mold, Tetairoa and McMillan. Not Tet. Doesn't want to be called Tet, so we're calling him Tetairoa or T-Mac. Apparently those are the 2 acceptable names for McMillan. But anyway, love McMillan leading up to the draft process. If anything, started to get some negative reviews on him ahead of the draft. I thought he was a bit overanalyzed, as a guy who had been on the draft radar for 2 full college seasons. Anyway, he lands with the Carolina Panthers inside the top 10. And initially I didn't love that landing spot. Still not sure I do, to be honest, but I absolutely believe in the talent that is Tetairoa McMillan, and there's no question he's going to step in as the clear number 1 in Carolina for Bryce Young. They still have Adam Thielen. He's one of, if not the oldest receiver in the league at this point. You're hoping to get more out of Xavier Legette this season. Jalen Coker has drawn rave reviews in camp. But ultimately, this is still one of the worst overall wide receiver groups in the NFL. And the Panthers spent a top 10 pick on McMillan. Given the level of investment, I think his price right now is really fair. Wide receiver 24 at the NFFC. This is a guy with excellent size, excellent athleticism, dominated targets at the college level. The Panthers have 115 targets to replace in the form of Deontay Johnson and David Moore from last season. It's also one of the worst defenses in the NFL. It was literally the worst in a number of categories a year ago. Historically bad, especially against the run, literally set the NFL record for most points allowed in a season. To the Panthers' credit, they threw resources at the defense in free agency. They'll get Derek Brown back. That matters. But I still don't think this is going to be a plus defense. I mean, we're talking below league average at best for Carolina. They'll play in a ton of shootouts. They're going to have to throw the ball downfield. The more I think about it, the upside versus cost equation for Tetairoa and McMillan, especially considering how many rookie receivers we've seen hit the ground running, even some in bad situations, like Brian Thomas last year, Malik Neighbors last year. I'm happy to take Tetairoa and McMillan in round 5. Before we get to the other 2 names on our list, go check out everything we have to offer over at RotoWire.com this season. Put in the code YouTube15. You see it right there on your screen. 15% off all of our subscription plans at RotoWire. You can do the draft planner. You can use our draft analyzer, our mock draft tool, custom rankings, you name it. Everything you need to dominate your drafts. Put in code YouTube15 at RotoWire.com. The next receiver on our list is George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, of this group, Pickens is the player that I've been the most in on since he signed in Dallas, but it's been a tough equation to kind of figure out exactly how that's going to work alongside CeeDee Lamb. I fully expect this, though, to be a high-volume passing game. The running back room is a potential disaster. The O-line is as big of a question mark as it was last season, if not even bigger. The Cowboys rank 3rd and 2nd in total passing yards in Dak Prescott's last 2 healthy seasons. Even last year, with Dak playing less than half of the games, they ranked 11th in yards, 3rd in total pass attempts. And again, that was with Dak just playing 8 games. They do have a new coaching staff in place. We can no longer just fall back on the same old under Mike McCarthy. But I think it's clear. The path to success for the Dallas Cowboys this season is going to be putting the ball in Dak Prescott's hands. When you dig in on the numbers for George Pickens, I think you have to expect some pretty serious touchdown progression for him this season. he had one of the biggest discrepancies between expected touchdowns and actual touchdowns last year. When you look at the data, the numbers say should have been closer to 7 or 8 touchdowns on the season. In Pittsburgh, he drew only 16 red zone targets all year, caught just 7 of those for all 3 of his touchdowns, and he didn't even catch a single touchdown until week 7 when Russell Wilson finally came on in relief of Justin Fields. 2 seasons ago, with a healthy Dak Prescott, Dallas led the NFL with 71 red zone drives, 31 more, by the way, than the Steelers had that season. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb will be heavily targeted. Jake Ferguson will have a say in the red zone, but Pickens is in a significantly more fantasy-friendly offense in Dallas than he ever was in Pittsburgh. If there is a caveat here, it's that Pickens is obviously no longer the true number 1 as he was in the Steelers. Even in a low-volume offense, that still matters. He's got one of the 3 best receivers in football next to him in CeeDee Lamb, and the presence of Lamb does put somewhat of a cap on Pickens' ultimate upside, but we're not really asking for a top 10, not even a top 15 type of season from George Pickens. The uptick in overall passing volume heading to Dallas should help compensate for that. Dallas threw the ball more than 8 more times per game than the Steelers did last year. And again, the lack of a running game, now a high-level number 2 in CeeDee Lamb, I expect the Cowboys to be right near the top of the league in passing volume again, assuming Dak is healthy. What it really boils down to with George Pickens is if you're chasing upside in the middle rounds, he's going round 5 in the NFFC, round 6 in home leagues, I think Pickens makes a ton of sense. You know, if he's your wide receiver 2, maybe you don't feel as good about that, but if you already have 2 wide receivers, you want to take a chance on that upside, I love George Pickens in that range. If you want safety, then maybe you look at Courtland Sutton, you look at Devontae Smith, Zay Flowers, even Calvin Ridley to a lesser degree. But if you're shooting for upside, take a look at Pickens, take a look at McMillan in that range. One more wide receiver who's grown on me over the last few weeks, Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers. A couple of months ago, I was essentially throwing up my hands when it came to the 49ers wide receiver group. But as we get closer to week 1, Pearsall is now clearly the guy that I want in that group. Still like Jawan Jennings a lot as a player, but he's been dealing with a calf injury. He's still at odds with the organization over his contract. Still somewhat unclear where the 2 sides stand on that. Brandon Ayuk, he's on the PUP list. We know he's going to miss at least 5 or 6 games to begin the year, and that might be a best case scenario. Who knows if he even looks like himself at all this season. He's fallen all the way to the wide receiver 60 at the NFFC in the last week. I think that number is going to continue to fall now that we have somewhat of a timetable. So really part of it with Pearsall is that he just has the fewest red flags by far of any of those 3 receivers. But we've also heard nothing but positive reviews on Ricky Pearsall coming out of Niners camp since he's moved past that early hamstring injury. He's looked like the best receiver on the field. And frankly, that's what the Niners should expect. They spent a first-round pick on Pearsall last season. I think the plan all along is that he would be somewhat of an heir apparent to Deebo Samuel. You look back at 2024, obviously Pearsall missed the start of the year after getting shot. We started to see him come on toward the end of the season. 14 catches on 18 targets, 210 yards, 2 touchdowns in weeks 17 and 18. We do have to consider the Niners are basically out of it at that point. Brock Purdy didn't even play in week 18, so I don't want to take too much from that limited sample. But again, this is a first-round talent, someone the Niners drafted to be a huge part of that core going forward. I think they're going to give him every opportunity to be the guy this season. At the very least, he has the least path of resistance to get there for a Niners team that probably needs him more than ever. I think Pearsall's ADP makes a ton of sense given the unknowns. You know, he did get off to a slow start while recovering from the gunshot wound. He had some disappointing games in the middle of the season when the Niners were struggling, but there's serious upside here for a Niners team that has the easiest schedule in football, is widely expected to once again be back in the Super Bowl mix. Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, the offense will run through them. We know that. But if the Niners are going to win double-digit games, if they're going to reassert themselves as a true Super Bowl contender, they're going to need a number 1 wide receiver. I think Pearsall is the guy. He's been steamed up to the 7th round in the NFFC, but in Yahoo League, still available in the 8th or the 9th. You know, with the Ayuk news, I think we're going to continue to see Ricky Pearsall rise and rise. So if you have a draft coming up, I would grab him sooner than later.